Hi, everyone. Welcome. My name is Andrea Wallace. I'm the Vice President of Artistic Affairs, and it's my pleasure tonight to introduce our visiting artist. Before we get started, no dogs. It's my dog. If you could, if you have a phone, if you could just put it on silence, that would be great. So Kevin is here as part of our Visiting Artist program. He received his BFA from... He's just being dramatic. It's okay. He received his BFA from San Francisco State University with a degree in printmaking. He co-founded the Accrue Project, an artist-run Kansas City gallery focused on contemporary, emerging, and underrepresented artists. In 2017, he created a permanent installation at the United Nations headquarters in New York City. He's completed residencies at the Joseph and Annie Albers Foundation, Archie Bray Foundation for the Ceramic Arts in Helena, Montana, the Center for Book Arts, New York, Plop Residency, London, Sim Residency in Reykjavik, Iceland, and the list goes on. His work has been featured in Pattern Recognition, curated by Amy Lincoln at Sparrow Westwater in 2022. Institutions owning his work include the United Nations of Art Collection in New York, the Evanston Museum of Art, Syracuse, Musin Utica, Fidelity Mutual Funds Collection, the Center for Book Arts, and the Marin Museum of Contemporary Art. The list continues to go on. It's a long resume, so we're really excited to have him here tonight. We are going to let him give a lecture, and then at the end, if you hold your questions, we will bring a mic around and put your hand up, and we'll bring a mic to you so that everyone can hear your question as well. So please welcome Kevin Umaña and give him a warm ranch welcome. Thank you.
Well, first of all, I'd like to thank the Anderson Ranch for inviting me to come. It's been a dream of mine to come here, and I've applied once or twice, but I'm glad I've came. So yeah, I make ceramic. Well, I'm a multidisciplinary artist that makes mostly ceramic paintings. What I call them. These are called the tablets. I usually give my works their own terms. So instead of calling them tiles, they're called tablets. Instead of calling them paintings or mosaics or collage, they're paintings. I was talking to a couple of residents, I think yesterday or the day before, but I think it's important for artists to control their narrative and not rely on their critics to tell the public what their works are about. But my works are mostly geometric abstraction works, mostly based out of, they're inspired by nature. And so I take a lot of information, a lot of references from nature, and until I simplify, distort it, and so this is a side view of the tiles. They're about half an inch or quarter of an inch thick. I work with mostly glazes, and I haven't worked with lusters yet, but that's coming up soon. And all the tablets have a hole in the center, so the hanging mechanism can be very transparent. And because they're called tablets, I always imagine that Martin Luther nailing his whatever to the door of the church, and so it's a reference to art history. And so, yeah, these are the hybrid paintings. I try to get as many detailed shots of them when I, exhibit them or post them online, because there's endless amount of textures and details and multiple mediums that go into these works, and so a lot of them deal with sand, oil, acrylic, tar, flocking, various materials. And so I don't have my notes, so I'm kind of like going with the wing. So, but yeah, they reference a lot of nature, and not to a point where they're so literal that you can tell. A lot of the hints are given to the viewer through the titles, and so it's something that I've been really interested in. So like my introduction to art was through architecture, and growing up very poor in LA, I lived with my three sisters and my mom in one room, and so I had to be the interior designer and like Tetris all the boxes or clothes that was just a mess, and two of us shared a bed, so I had to really make the room manageable, I guess I would say. And so I would say that was my introduction to art. So I went to San Francisco State for architecture. Eventually, I dropped out of that program because I just got tired of making blueprints and converting, these mathematical conversions to develop, just to pretty much be working for someone else. And so I started studying printmaking and then art history. And then I think I had a girlfriend that introduced me to abstract art. And so I really got into Marcel Duchamp. And, everyone knows the fountain that he exhibited in the Armory. But I really enjoyed this piece, and I would say this piece really was a pivotal moment in my life because it was, someone depicting something from the natural world in this abstract language. And so I thought, if he can do that, I can certainly try. And so I started looking into how the cubists would look at. So a lot of my work, well, I'll go back to that. But also another person I was really interested in was Ellsworth Kelly, and he was thinking the same way as cubists, but more in a minimal way. And so this is like a drawing that the shape painting on the right it's called Tulip. And so this is one of his photographies. And so I was just kind of reading a lot about artists that I enjoyed. The sad part is like I moved to New York from San Francisco because I wanted to work with him, and it just happens that year he like died. So, oh well. But I got really into photography, and so my first road trip or my first trip outside North America was Europe, and so I went around, I don't know, like 17 countries, and I just kind of used up all the film rolls that I took with me, but I noticed that I was capturing a lot of like symmetric compositions, and I always like frame things right down the middle, and I'm not sure if that was an inspiration from Wes Anderson or aesthetically or my architectural background about like symmetric, but as you would see, symmetry plays a big part of my artwork. So I started taking a lot of photographs of objects and nature and locations. I would never photograph any people from the start. I was never really into figuration or representational work. And so that was the background and my obsession with symmetry. And my obsession with color comes from, growing up in El Salvador and LA. You often see color depicted in the I lived in the poor area, so you would see all these beautiful storefronts that were very colorful, very DIY, very unique, because they often use color and patterns and all these motifs to make their situations better. And so this is just a close-up image of a leaf. And so I'm just trying to show you the beauty of geometry in the natural world, the beauty of color in the natural world. Right now, I just finished a series that's going to be exhibited in the ADAA Art Fair in New York with Spurny Westwater. And the series is called Birds Stealing Bread. And so in the past couple of months, I've been just researching about not just birds in their physical sense, but their influence in spirituality and certain symbolisms that have been occurred throughout history. And so after my Europe trip, didn't really consider myself an artist. And so I really, I saw all these artists that I've never heard of. And for some reason, I thought I can do it. I was like, oh, I can be an artist. And so while I was working at Whole Foods as a baker, I'll go work at 6 a.m. and then end at 1 p.m. And then I'll start working on this book that I finished. It was called Pocket Symphony. And so for a whole summer, I just worked on this book that features about 50 gouache paintings. And that's when I first got introduced how lonely a studio life is, And so I kind of went a little, it was an interesting summer, pretty much. That's what I'm trying to say. And so I got really, I graduated printmaking degree, but I never did any printmaking after college because it requires such a large press. And at that time, I could not even afford to have a studio. And so I started making these self-published artist books. And with these self-published artist books, I realized that, because I kept in San Francisco, I kept trying to break into the art world, and I just wouldn't get accepted. No one would want to see my work. And it makes sense because I wasn't ready to show that. But I realized that with artist books, it's pretty much just a walking portfolio. And so I always tell artists that, if you're stuck and you're not really getting exposed or you're not really getting your work seen, instead of going up to a gallery and with your portfolio and be like, hey, can you take a look at my work? Just make an artist book. It doesn't have to be extravagant. You can make a zine, but you can give copies to other artists. So I mailed out a bunch of these artist books to artists that I'm still friends with nowadays. So it was the best. It was kind of like back in the days when artists used to send letters to other artists. And so I started having more and more connections with artists in New York, in London, all over the place. And so I started getting more publicity about my work. And so I started getting hired to do graphic design. And I don't know anything about computers. And so I had to draw everything out, scan it, vector it, such a long process. And that, I don't know how the UN found me, but they took a risk on my work and they commissioned me to do a mural or just an installational piece. But from Elser Kelly, I was doing a lot of shape painting. So I was doing a lot of woodworking. So I was teaching myself woodworking. And these are fairly big works. And so they're multiple layers and dimensions of wood stacked on top each other, kind of similar to what my hybrid paintings are now. This is just a reference photo for the audience to see how an image of the natural world can be depicted in this sort of abstract vocabulary. And then this is my interpretation of the Brooklyn Bridge. I don't expect the audience to see the Brooklyn Bridge from this image, but I see it, and I try to make it as simple yet complex for the viewer to see it, to understand what they're looking at. And so, I started doing residencies in 2018, and I moved from San Francisco to New York. I was first introduced what an artist studio was, and so I started teaching myself what it takes to be an artist. And so someone told me to do residencies, and I've been doing them ever since, but they're pretty much an extension to your education, and you can expand your network to wherever you go. And so I highly recommend that. And this is just an installation image of my first show in New York. Was a 3-person show. It was at Joshua Liner Gallery in Chelsea. And I was pretty proud of it because it was still very architectural. And so this is from my playground series. So I would go to, it sounds creepy, but I would go to playgrounds and I would try to see different sections and different perspectives from one standing object. And so kind of like what the cubists do, where it's like, I'm gonna paint this from the front, aerial view, sideways, underneath, and plastered it on a 2D surface. And so I was kind of treating my work that way, and I still do. And so eventually, 2018, I was mostly just getting group shows. I was still like struggling. I was working like 3 jobs, and I got a studio just to pay for the studio. And so eventually, I moved to Kansas City at the start of the pandemic because in New York it was like very treacherous. And for some reason, I thought that this flu thing was just gonna die out in a couple of weeks, and it just didn't. And so I went to Kansas City with a backpack and no painting supplies. And so I had a friend who had a ceramic studio, and so I got into. I've done a couple of ceramics before 2020, and I've always wanted to do it, but I just never had the facilities to do it. And so when I moved to Kansas City, I was able to just solely focus on ceramics. And what I learned from going from a big city to a smaller, slower paced city is that I was able to devote more of my time to my fine art practice instead of trying to juggle, a hobby and 2 jobs and paying rent. And so, yeah, exactly. So I opened up, there was essentially, I was viewed as an outsider in Kansas City, and no one, for some reason, people saw me as a threat because I was a New Yorker in Kansas City, and there's a lack of resources, so everyone's fighting for the same opportunities, same grants. And so I found it hard to, have my own artist community there until I met a group of New Yorkers. And so I started hanging out with them, and they are still so supportive with me. But I opened up a gallery and a design store and a ceramic studio because rent is extremely cheap. Not anymore, but it was. So instead of trying to be included in art shows in Kansas City, I realized, I can just open up a gallery and bring in artists I want to see exhibiting in Kansas City, and I'll curate it. And so from that, I learned a lot about the professional aspects of being an artist. And so I learned how to write an exhibition statement, photograph works, documentation, shipping, insurance, all these things that I do think artists should be aware of, like the administrative side. And so I had the gallery only lasted for a year. I ran out of money. It was solely funded by my own art sales, which I wasn't really having any. But it was a really fun endeavor. And so, I started doing tablets for the first time. And for the beginning, I was like, I hated them. They're too like messy. They're too organic. They're not hard-edged. They're not geometric. But it did allow me to relinquish a lot of control. And then at the same time I was doing ceramics, I was also reading up on philosophy. And so like the Stoics and Taoism and all these sort of, I was doing therapy, but I was learning a lot about my physical self, my mental self, and the work that I was putting out. And, I'm a big follower of the Bauhaus movement, and so they always say healthy mind, or healthy body, healthy mind. And so I started, what's the word I'm thinking of? Associating positive mental attitude with ceramics. And so I started including a lot of philosophical ideas, a lot of meditational, metaphysical ideas into nature. And so this one's called Seeking Light in the Form of Fire. I'm gonna speed it up because I feel like I'm just going off and on. But yes, I had my first solo exhibition ever, and it was in New York, 2021, and I think like 3 people came because it was a pandemic, and it was up in Harlem, and the gallery did a horrible job in promoting it. And I always tell people, I always associate galleries or representation with galleries the same as dating. You kind of have to date a couple of people to realize what a healthy relationship is. And this is not, I was really proud. So it was a heartbreaking exhibition because I was put my heart and soul into it, and nothing sold. And for 6 months, I was just depressed, and I was just like, oh, I was like starting looking into coding school because I was like, I'm just gonna go into computers. But my friend gave me a commission, and that just happened to like, just last me, a couple of months until. Oh yeah, so this is just to show you the preparatory work. I usually work in thumbnails, and I don't fully sketch anything out because like I do this. I color by number, and so I always draw out the simple layout, and then each section has a certain medium or technique devoted to it, and so it's hard to tell on the screen, but there's a lot of dimensional, textural aspects to my work. This is another tablet piece, and you can see the references. And I like to keep my titles very poetic, but also comedic, and try not to take things too seriously, but also take some seriously. But yeah, so I'm really into architectural still. I do a lot of art history references. I don't, yeah. And then, yeah, so it's, I'm showing all these things because I'm trying to show the viewers that everything I've learned till now, I implemented to my hybrid paintings. So I use photography as reference images. I use my skills in printmaking for making tools and like layering. I use my skills as a handyman to make, faux finishes and all these things. I'm implementing every skill and every trade that I've learned till now into my works, and so I take a lot of, it takes me forever to finish these works, not only because ceramics takes weeks and months to finish, but to pre-plan everything, it's insane. But I also leave it up to chance a lot. So this slide worked perfectly to this thing. But I also got really into, I'm a huge fan of the Bauhaus movement, and I love John Arp's his work, but he also wrote this like theories of laws of chance, and it's very similar to I Ching, where it's like you kind of go with what you're given, and so it's very similar to improvising when it comes to music composition. You kind of have to play with the medium and the equipment, and like you kind of have to go with the flow to cut it short. And so at the same time, I was, when I was in Ireland, I investigated a lot about the Albers and, how the impact of the Latin and Central America had on their work. And so for being, a person from El Salvador looking into these German artists, looking into Latin America, it was just such a trip. And so I started looking into my own, backyard, and then even talking to my mom, who has no education or no background in art, realizing that she used to do ceramics, but in the functional way, so like to be able to eat off a plate, or she knew what a pit fire was, and I was just like, it kind of reawakened or this bond I had with my mom, and so we started talking botany and we started talking ceramics, but we started talking about like our culture, indigenous culture, and how like they were like one of the, I would say, the first abstract artists, because they would use abstract pictorial elements to, invent a vocabulary. And so, I always wanted to be an archaeologist, so being able to look back in time and use anthropological references in my works has been really exciting. seeing symmetry around the world has been also really exciting. So I'm like a nature freak, and so that's why it plays such a huge component to my work. Grecas, pyramid things. And so like my hybrid paintings first came to me when they broke. And anyone who works in ceramics knows how fickle ceramics can be. And so instead of throwing it away, I kind of just kept a pile of them in the box in the corner of my studio for a long time until I realized like, I kind of want to copy the techniques of glazes. So I want to imitate glazes. And so I think the first one I glued onto canvas, and so I started teaching myself how to do certain glazes, and so and that was for a year until someone came by and like, oh, what's this? And then I hated it, but they loved it, and so I can kind of continue making them. And then I was in a group show in Spurney Westwater, and then Angela Westwater, she's a legend in the New York art scene, and she just kind of pulled me aside during the summer group exhibition and just asked me a bunch of questions about my practice, and I was not prepared for that. And from like those 40 minutes of just talking to Angela, she loved my work, which this person who's shown Andy Warhol, Bruce Nauman, Julian Schnabel, Carl Andre, all these artists. For her to love my work, I just kind of gave me this feeling that I was able to do it. So she gave me the confidence to pursue making hybrid paintings. And so I just wanted to show what they looked like. So I bisque the slabs. I let them dry for months or weeks. I draw the composition out. I strategically indicate what the colors are going to be, and then I have to. So a lot of the painting portions have to rely on the ceramic portions, and a lot of the ceramic portions have to rely on my painterly approach to ceramics. And so, I'm really into gestural art makings, and I think that's from my history in printmaking. But yes, it takes a lot to make these works because most of the times they're happy accidents, and then a lot of the times I have to teach myself on the spot how to learn how to flock, how I can manipulate resin, how can I burn this into it. And so it's a lot of times when I'm making these hybrid paintings, I'm in my research and development phase, and so a lot of times I'm experimenting on them. So each hybrid painting, I never repeat my motifs or patterns or compositions, and so each one's always brand new, and they also have this sort of, seeing them in person, they're about like 3 to 4 inches thick. So here's the ceramic element to them, and then I stretch my own canvas, and so I make the canvas out of wooden panels, and then cut the edges, the rounded edges, and have these jagged pieces because they're supposed to, it first started off from the tablets forms and the organic form, and so I like to keep, although they're 18 by 24 or 16 by 20s, they're still somewhat shaped. And so this is just like a close-up of the textures. And so walking downtown, it does not look like a downtown, but if you look from it in an aerial way, and from an aerial view, you can kind of see a glimpse of it. And then there's this one from my first solo exhibition at Spurney Westwater. And the funny story about this one is like I was going through heartbreak, and this was like my heartbreak piece. And then there's a collector that was a dick to me, and he bought this piece knowing that this was my most personal piece, and he kind of like shoved that in front of my face. But Yeah, so I started working three-dimensional when I went to Archie Bray, and started teaching myself coil building, um, and then slab building, and then but also teaching myself how to mix experiment with glazes. And so my time in Archie Bray has been very pivotal in my career. I started looking at ceramics differently, like the pottery and vessels, and it's been hard to figure out how to add something new to this trade, this pottery that's been around for millenniums. And so I'm still in the, I don't really technically exhibit these as much because I'm in the experimentation phase. And so I'm still trying to learn how to make this into something new, just how my paintings are somewhat newish. I like to think they're newish. But yeah, I just do all sorts of works. I do a lot of three-dimensional works, a lot of installation works, a lot of paintings, but also because of my background in architecture, I'm also a design freak, and I love like lighting and chairs. And so this was my attempt in making this sort of pyramid lamp. And yeah, and so I'm here at Anderson Ranch, working in the fab lab in 3D printing. So right now I'm teaching myself how to work with certain applications in 3D printing. So I'm using this time, and I'm very appreciative for Anderson Ranch for allowing me to come in and do some research and experiments. But yeah, sorry, that's my go. That's about it. Yeah. Any questions? Don't be shy. Yes.
Hi, Kevin. I'm hoping you can talk about how rules guide your work. It seems like you have rules that you follow and rules that you break and maybe rules that you make up. Is that something you think about or something that's just kind of accidentally part of your work?
No, I'm so happy you brought that up because I told myself I was going to bring that up in my presentation. I'm pretty anal about things, and I try not to follow the rules nowadays because I think if I learn too much of something or if I go by the books, it kind of restricts my creativity. And so a lot of times I have this naivete approach to my works, and so I try to break them enough where they're still going to be archival. And so I'm not going to work with things that are going to flake off, but still I'm going to, when I'm approaching ceramics, I'm thinking as a painter. When I'm approaching painting, I'm thinking as a ceramicist. When I'm approaching textiles, I'm thinking as an industrial designer. And so I like to have this unorthodox approach to the certain elements or mediums that I'm working with. So I follow the rules to a certain extent, but my aim is to think outside of the box and use that medium or that surface in a very unorthodox way. So to a certain extent, all my works are archival, but I also have to do a lot of research and experimentations to make sure the epoxy glues onto wood or ceramics. And so rules, yes. Here and now. A lot of like improvising. Yeah. Questions?
So, with your background as an architect, I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about how you think your hybrid paintings act in space. And do you prefer the conversation of 2D, 3D, or do you prefer thinking of them similar to furniture, as in atmosphere setters.
What was the last part? Sorry.
Thinking about your work as like a tone setting for a room or for a space.
Yeah, I'm very huge fan of Le Corbusier, and he talked about, he was an architect, but he was also a painter. But he said something around the lines that art should be hand in hand with the architecture that's it's built on. So a lot of the times, artworks would commission for the specific new spaces. And so sometimes I like to think about that. So like when I'm doing a solo exhibition, I like to go view the space and I think in my head what the capabilities are, and it's like, how am I going to work in installation into this structure. And so with the hybrid paintings, they're fairly, I'm still getting the hang of them. They're I'm still writing. Another thing I do is I write notes while I'm creating, and I usually creating 20 paintings at a time. And so I'm still developing the vocabulary when it comes to them. Yeah, I don't think I always think about the architectural space, but I haven't really thought as an architect in a long time. Right now, I'm just thinking as, I don't know what I'm thinking. But no, I think it's an interesting aspect because sometimes something I've learned listening to the Beach Boys' Pet Sounds is like you have to think conceptually as a whole instead of like doing individual pieces. You have to see the whole picture. And so when I'm given a solo exhibition to do, I have to consider what city it's going to be in, what space it's going to be in, what kind of crowd it has. So I don't want to cater to them, but I also want to be able to adapt to the environment. And so I guess that would be architectural, adapting to environment. But that's a good question. I haven't really thought about that. Yeah.
It seems like there have been a lot of ups and downs in your career, as there are with most artists. I'm just wondering what has sustained you through the good times and the bad times. What's kept you going?
Obsession. No, I think starting from the bottom. Just I've never had anything in my life, so I always think to myself, it can't get any worse than this. And so I don't know. I like to think that one day I would inspire someone to do specific works just the way some of my idols have inspired me to keep going. And so I'm not, in high school I was a jock, so it might be a sports competitiveness or you just got to keep going. It's a positive, my mom's, she's went through so much hardship, but she's somehow very positive about life. And it's very inspiring to see someone so close to me view life in that way. And so there's really, I would be happy living in a shack in the mountains if I just can continue doing what I'm doing. I think it's just, and also like reading Marcus Aurelius, the Meditations, it really is up to you to see what the situation is. Every situation is neutral. You can either make it bad or you can make it good. And I always try to have a positive outlook on certain situations. And so I think if, no one's born a genius. It just takes a lot of hard work to get to where you want to be. Yeah. You had a question? Sorry, I hope that answered your question.
I feel like you didn't talk enough about your foray into vessel making. And I'm just kind of curious how you think, if you could elaborate a little bit more, how you think about those, like maybe where you see those going, or your interest in the vessel? Because I think that it's intriguing that you went to Archie Bray, and it's no accident that you left making some vessel forms.
Yeah, it's hard. I have an understanding what the vessels are. Eventually I want to give them a name that's not vessels, because I do not make them for them. I don't make them to hold water, and so they're not technically vessels. And I want to approach vessels the way I approach the hybrid paintings, where they include a different medium. Who would have imagined glazes to be similar to painting? I mean, they are, but no one will ever see a ceramic flatwork as a painting. And so I want to approach, I hope this makes sense, but it's like I want to have the same approach to vessels, where it's like, so right now I'm working, I'm not sure if I should be saying this out loud, but right now I'm working implementing textiles with vessels, and also a wood. And so having a hybrid vessel that implements a mixed media component to it. And so I'm still learning. I'm still trying to figure out what it's going to be, but I have to exhibit them next year, so I have to figure it out soon. But I think Archie Bray, being around so many ceramicists, I was brought in as a painter, so like the director really wanted to shake things up. And so I was happy to be around artists who were in architecture and other fields of art. And we had the similar outlook on, this doesn't only have to be functional, it doesn't only have to look good, it can be whatever we make it. And so I'm trying to have that same mentality into the vessel process, making process, baking process. Yeah. Yes.
Can you go back to the last photos or the building?
Which one? This one?
No, that one. This one. It's I don't know. I'm intrigued by this work, but you can't really tell what is glaze, what is acrylic plexi, and then light bulb. But it's really hard from here to see what it is.
Mm-hmm.
Are you trying to I wondered if you're trying to blur those things, or what is your intention? Are you trying to trick the viewer, or what?
Yeah, I think when I stumbled upon minimalism, I also stumbled upon optical art. And so most of the time I'm trying to not confuse the viewer, but play an illusion and just blur the lines and not kind of make them in separate lines, I would say. So this can't only be in the ceramic line or painting line. But I don't know how to answer this question. But it's a lot of, I'm trying to think of the word. I'm trying to put certain materials and mediums in a very incognito way onto the surface. And so a lot of great art, I hardly ever look at contemporary art, but the artists that I really do love and admire, I always have to ask myself, how did they make that? I can't possibly replicate that. And so I always try to make my work in the same way, where it's I'm trying to make it hard for someone to replicate it, and for someone to be amazed by the technical approach to it, the same way as certain artists that I admire, they're unique because only that person can make it. And so I'm still trying to practice that. And so a lot of the works take a long time because they're very technical. And so I have to not only teach myself, but also, I was a handyman. And so I knew how to hide accidents. I knew how to hide imperfections. And so I learned a lot about fixing up little nooks and crannies.
Thank you. I was curious how much you think about like camouflage. Like you were kind of just talking about it.
That's
but
the word. Sorry.
Yeah. Okay. I just love the way that it's like all the shapes are sort of like an imperfect camouflage, and like they almost seem like a digital glitch.
Yeah.
And I was wondering if you think about that in terms, like, well, you talked about nature, but do you think about that at all in terms of like technology, or like, because in the photo they really do have this like kind of mysterious quality of like what's happening, you know?
Yeah, you know, I'm trying to play with the eye. You know, your eye wants to see the picture finish in a certain way. Like for instance, you know, this is this technically isn't the right color as this, or like, you know, the line doesn't really start there. So there, a lot of the works are open-ended. You know, it's up to the viewer to really finish the work, and it's up to the viewer to distinguish what the work's about. You know, I give you hints on the titles, but you know, I use Photoshop too. You know, to like, I have to figure out my mistakes. If I'm stuck on something, I have to like change the color, and so I use a lot of analog equipment, but also digital equipment. So like, you know, a lot of my works, I like to think they're, you know, I'm a painter's painter. I love old painters, but I also love like modern technology, and so I'm trying to implement modern technology in that way. But it's also, you know, trying to freak your eye out and like, this shouldn't be here, but for some reason it makes sense. It's like, how do I make something look, you know, how do I make something so simple look so complex? And by doing that, I can change the composition slightly enough where your eye doesn't really see the errors at the moment, but if you look at it long enough, you're like, oh, I don't mind that. So yeah, it's I you know, I never do a perfect job in like camouflaging the compositions. I do it enough where it's like it has this naive approach to it, and it has this sort of playful approach to the work. You know, they're very, you know, I work a lot with colors because they often depict joyous experiences, you know, and I always try to capture not the literal location of things or the literal objects, is how do I capture this essence, and how do I capture something that excites me? And by seeing certain colors and certain shapes and certain compositions work together in this harmonious way, you know, and I'm also like, they're very symmetric. And so I like to think I want to make something symmetric look so asymmetric. And I think having those jaggy, funny, you know, lovely parts of the glazes contribute to that. So, yes.
Hi. You talked about being an architect and how that's influenced your work, but you also said you were a handyman and a baker, and I think a lot of that's relatable to me and other people in the room of working in these other fields. And I was just wondering if, or how you think about how those things like influence your day-to-day life as an artist now, and just like thinking of like the whole of your life as something that's generative for your practice, like if there was something from baking that like influences your work now, or
Yeah.
so on and so forth.
I would say everything in life is a learning process. You know, you have to, you know, our brains can only retain certain information, but I like to think that things happen the way they're supposed to happen. And so, you know, if I was supposed to work at Jamba Juice, I was supposed to learn how to make smoothies. And so every morning nowadays, I make a smoothie for myself. Or if I was supposed to be a busboy or supposed to work at a gallery, you know, working as an art handler, I learned so much about art that way and how to package work and, you know, all these things. And so I always tell people, it's like, you have to take something from the situation. You have to take something from the experience. You know, even if it's bad or good, there's something to learn from it. And I think, you know, I'm just trying to accumulate as much knowledge as I can. And I'm supposed to be learning certain things. And you know, I'm trying to appreciate, you know, they do say knowledge is power. So it's like, I just want to know everything. And and I want to really implement it. And so, yeah, it's very important in my life, I would say. I'm always like reading something, or, in the studio, I'm usually watching documentaries on things that I think will be useless, but I'm learning something, about the Victorian age, or, architectural marvels or whatever. I think I just love filling my brain up with knowledge. Okay. I think thank you. Thank you very much.